You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
It's my pleasure to be here with Dan Wagner today, who has a company called Rezolve that I learned about recently, having read about them in the press. So the first thing we'd want to get to, Dan, thanks for joining me, is the Rezolve origin story, and if you can share that.
Yes, I mean, my team and and myself come from a long history of commerce activities. I set up my first company in the early 80s, in 1984, probably before you were born, Kevin. And
I'm 57, so no, I think
good.
We're in the same genre.
Looking good. So I started that business in 1984. It was an online information business. So we digitized newspapers and trade journals and made them available for corporate libraries to interrogate them. And, in order to do that in the 80s, we had to build our own data centers. We had to build our own commerce tools and search tools and infrastructure to affect the transactions. And so really that was an e-commerce business. And then the second business I set up was an enterprise class e-commerce platform in the late 90s that went on to become the European market leader for e-commerce. Think of it as like Shopify for large retailers. And we ran the e-commerce sites for Neiman Marcus and Land's End and TJX companies, Under Armour, LL Bean, people like that. And then I sold that to Oracle in 2014. So really what we try to do with Rezolve is the next phase of commerce, in my view. And I've always been kind of a bit ahead of the game, maybe. That's the one thing I would say is my skill, is that I've been able to identify trends ahead. And I believe very strongly that there needs to be a new kind of platform for mobile engagement, because I think what's been happening with retailers and brands and manufacturers is that they've been struggling to engage with consumers via the mobile phone. And we've seen this in, the way in which they've been kind of disaggregated over the last few years by technology players. For example, if I see an ad from CVS advertising, an aftershave, and I want to buy that aftershave, I don't type into my phone www.cvs.com, navigate to, aftershave, navigate to the aftershave brand they're advertising. I simply pick up my phone and search Google, and then I probably might buy it from Amazon. And so completely disconnected from the purchase stimulation of the ad, which was paid for by CVS, ends up CVS don't get the order. That's a broken system. And we have a similar thing happening now with kind of food and beverage. I used to order when I was living in New York from the local deli, pick up the phone and I'd call them up and I say, can you send up a tuna melt and a Dr. Pepper? And, 10, 15, 20 minutes later, it would be there, right? There was no issue with that process. But now what happens is, and everybody does this, they pick up their phone and they use DoorDash or Uber Eats to do the same thing and to order from the same deli. But now the deli is having to give away 25% of their revenue. And we all know how this journey ends. It's only a matter of time before DoorDash or Uber Eats spin up a dark kitchen and that deli goes out of business. So this is a problem, a fundamental problem that we've been watching in slow motion as, Bed Bath & Beyond and JCPenney and Barney's and others have been through these, massive challenges to their business, if not taken them out of business, because they haven't had the tools to engage with consumers by their mobile phones. That's simply down to that. So Rezolve has been set up to solve that problem, and we do it as a new kind of commerce platform. It's a very exciting, and it allows, for example, in the examples I gave you, for when I see an ad to just wave my phone over the ad and tap, and I buy it from that advertiser. The convenience of that is so compelling that I won't bother to try to search Google for it. I'll just buy it from the advertiser. And then, there are other examples. We use geolocation, we use images, audio, social media, lots of different what we call triggers to stimulate an engagement with a consumer via their mobile phone. This is true omnichannel commerce, a true online to offline commerce stack. And nobody really has devised anything like this. I think we have innovated it, we're the pioneers of it, and we're now starting to see great traction in its take-up.
From the way you described it, it seems like it's useful both from the harvesting of existing demand, where the person already knows what they want, as well as where there was an external stimulus or trigger that caused the demand, or perhaps took somebody from mid-funnel to late funnel, but you wanted to make sure that the proper brand or manufacturer or retailer captured the transaction.
Correct. I mean, that's where everything's gone wrong. You know, if you owned a hardware store, Kevin, today in Manhattan on 37th and 7th, right? How are you going to survive? You know, you're only going to get business when somebody's walking past your front door and says, oh, I need some light bulbs or I need some batteries. But when that person is a block away in their apartment, they're going to pick up their phone and order it from Amazon. And now, right now, you have a competitive advantage. You're a block away from the buyer. You can run somebody up there and deliver it in 10 minutes. Amazon can't do that. And that's a convenience factor that you have, but you can't exploit because you don't have the technology to talk to that person when they're not in your store. So, you know, we solve these fundamental problems that put the power back into the physical retailer, who today has one key advantage, and that's proximity. And that's why we've called, you know, our ticker symbol is zone. When we trade, it's Z-O-N-E, right? And it's about, you know, the geolocation, the proximity of a merchant to a consumer and leveraging that.
So do you see each store having its own app, or do you see centralizing this into sort of just purely your own app that then becomes that constant app that the person keeps on their phone? So as that hardware store on 37th and 7th or wherever it was, do I need to get my consumers to install my app, or will there be a Rezolve or Zone app that they'll use?
So well, actually, there's three different options here. I mean, one is that the larger merchants have their own apps and they can just put the Rezolve code in their apps. So one day I wake up the next morning and my, you know, Chick-fil-A app has been updated and it now has Rezolve technology in it, and suddenly the disposable cup from Chick-fil-A or the wrapper for my burger is interactive. And when I'm not in the store, they can communicate with me based upon my proximity to a restaurant and encourage me to come in and things like that. So, you know, that's just a sort of, you know, a plugin. Think of it like that. For an SME, for a small business, an SMB that, you know, is trading like the hardware store on 7th Avenue, they're not necessarily ever going to have their own app. So they're going to need to rely on what we call distributor apps. Distributor apps could be a social media app like TikTok or Twitter or Pinterest in the social media space. Or maybe it would be a payment app like PayPal or Klarna that can add our technology and interact with all the merchants. And so we look for those partners to participate in our you know, marketing activity. And then there are other distributor partners that are banks, like a bank app, or a telco app like AT&T. And all of these guys have a different reason for wanting to put our code in their app. You know, PayPal want to take you out of the digital world and into the physical world and use PayPal. Nobody really does that. Most people don't use PayPal in physical locations, despite them trying for years to break in. We open that up for them with this very innovative way of engaging. And so, you know, and the others have other reasons. You know, social media want commerce to drive engagement from their advertising. And what happens at the moment, if I see an ad, you know, a post from somebody in TikTok and I show interest, I tap it, I bounce out of TikTok into a web funnel, you know, a sales funnel, four pages of hell, you know, to check out 4 pages of hell, and may or may not end up going through that process. And of course, I may not come back to TikTok for a while. I've gone, right? Whereas keeping everybody within there, tap, I bought it, I'm still in TikTok, I continue to watch another video mindlessly, you know, until the next thing comes up that I might end up buying. That process is that's what we solve. And within our architecture is some very sophisticated, you know, multi-baskets, marketplace, all this kind of stuff that you'd expect from a deep commerce kind of a background.
Where do the brands who don't have their own DTC fit in? Do they collaborate with the retailer to perhaps use some promotional dollars to increase their visibility within the ecosystem or within the app? You know, because obviously some brands have gone DTC, other brands have not, and rely on channels. So I would rely on that hardware store primarily for distribution.
So here's how it would work, right? If I'm a brand that wants to push the order through the retail channel, I encourage the user to scan with whatever app, right? It could be a Rezolve app, a Zone app. It could be a distributor app, like PayPal or Twitter, right, or whatever. Or it could be their own app, right? So I scan, say, a can of Coca-Cola, and it says, buy Coke now, a pack of 24, and it would list the retailers in order of either proximity or price or something. I tap it and I've ordered it from them. So they're pushing the order through. But what they get from that, not only do they get the order, of course, but what they actually get from that is all my data. And what they don't know, what the CPCs, the consumer products companies, what they don't know is who drinks Classic Coke. They know they sell X million cans of Classic Coke, but they don't know that Dan Wagner drinks Classic Coke. They don't know who Dan Wagner is. They don't know his email address or his mobile phone number or where he lives. And they don't know where he drinks their Classic Coke. So getting that information about their consumers is really key. It may be today they don't want to go D2C, but maybe tomorrow they do. They can't go D2C if they don't know who their customers are. So what we do is we bridge that for CPCs as well. We provide them the data about their customers. It's perfectly reasonable for them to have that. The second part of your question was, what if they do want to do D2C? Well, of course, it's the same experience, scan, but tap, and now they've taken the order directly and can ship the product to me and, of course, retain the margin accordingly.
Right. One interesting point that you bring up, where when we're sort of comparing and contrasting mobile with other digital channels, is the mobile device is an individual device, not a family device. There's a lot of hype and buzz around CTV and the connected televisions and other things that are still family devices. But one thing that's really unique to the smartphone is it's a personal device. So it is, in fact, Dan. It's not Dan's family. It's not Dan's household.
And it's
right?
Absolutely right. And it's not just that. The you were saying about the mobile phone is a personal device. The mobile phone is the most important personal device to any individual today. It is the center of their communication world. It is the thing they interact with almost every minute of every day. And it is so important that undoubtedly, Kevin, you have yours right in front of you, as I do in front of me. And the thing is, if it's not in my hand, if I leave it somewhere, it is a panic. It's more important than almost anything. So that dynamic isn't changing in 5 years' time. That dynamic, the form factor of the mobile device as we know it today might change, but its importance to our ability to interact with the world around us will not. And so the current systems aren't fit for purpose for that. They're just not fit for purpose. E-commerce is a desktop environment. And when we talk about mobile commerce today, it's really e-commerce packaged to fit a mobile screen or a small screen. Well, that's not mobile commerce. That's just e-commerce packaged to fit a small screen. And the mobile device has so much more inherent value and power that, building a ground up platform in the way that we have provides, this kind of engagement is suitable for the environment that we work in today and we live in today.
So a lot of retailers and brands and manufacturers have sort of jumped on the app bandwagon, perhaps not fully thinking through the fact that they haven't actually provided any kind of a quid pro quo as to why the consumer should keep the app installed, even if they manage to convince the consumer to try it. There's, unlike the heavily used apps like the Ubers and the food ordering apps, where a person, once they install it, may become a heavy user. These sporadic apps tend to get churn, especially if they don't provide some real value. So for the retailer who's sort of struggling with, do I integrate your SDK, right? Because actually right now people aren't really using my app that much, and I've sort of screwed it up because my app is not particularly good. Do I just sort of layer in the SDK and sort of take a fresh run at it that way? Do I start from scratch with a new app, or do I just decide, oh, well, my strategy is really work with the distributor apps that Dan's team has put together?
So if you're a retailer who has an app and you've made an investment commitment to that app, then whether you decide to give it up or not, if you were to add Rezolve technology to that app, you become part of the ecosystem. So the PayPal app, assuming that's somebody that has put our code in it, would work with you as well. So it's really important to remember that app penetration is really low amongst customers of stores. Even Starbucks, which is regarded as the most successful app introduction to their customer base, it's still below 25% of the customer base, which means that 75% plus of the customers of Starbucks don't use their app. Now that's the most successful. When you look at the majority, it's about 8% penetration, 8 to 10%, right? Now that's really a fraction of the customers, with 90% of them not having the app. So what Rezolve does is you could still have a strategy to maintain your app in market as a value driver for very loyal customers. You add Rezolve to that, but of course, at the same time, what happens is you're now exposed into the telcos and the bank apps and the payment apps. So you probably are capturing your 90%. So if I was to get a notification from Starbucks, but through my PayPal app, even though they're communicating to their merchant, their customer base through their own app, but I get it through the PayPal app and I engage, then suddenly they capture me. I'm a customer, but now they know it's Dan Wagner, and he bought, an oat milk latte and a cookie. They don't know that about me because I'm not on their app. It's the people that are not on their app they don't know anything about, and suddenly they've now recruited me. Even if I'm not on their app, they've recruited me into their ecosystem of data, and that's what's driving everybody. Really, everybody wants to know who their customers are, and they don't. And often what happens is they're communicating to their customers, and then they lose them. So we're trying to bridge that problem, and I think we're bridging it in a very elegant and innovative way.
One thing that's clear when folks jump into the mobile marketing and mobile commerce ecosystem is that there are some fairly considerable differences by country and by culture with regards to the way consumers are interacting with their mobile devices. How should they reconcile that when they think about the next phase of their mobile strategy? Should it be very country specific? Should it attempt to be global, or is there even a regional element to it based on population density or some other factor that they should use?
No, well, they should definitely be thinking locally because the local environments are very different. Some regions are very similar. I mean, the United States and Latin America are not dissimilar, and Europe, they're across those three areas, quite similar in that retailers of size have their own apps. Typically, SMEs do not, or SMBs. And then you come to places like India and China, where nobody has any apps. They're all reliant on, super apps or payment wallet apps. So in India, it's Paytm and MobiKwik and those kind of guys. And in China, of course, it's WeChat. That's where Rezolve is. Rezolve is in WeChat in China. So when you're thinking about China, you have to think about mini apps, and in Indonesia it's the same thing. Indonesia is really dependent on the super apps, Grab, Gojek, and others. But I think that most American businesses are operating in the West. They're either operating in the United States and or Europe, and in those markets it's very similar profile of engagement. So their apps can be pretty similar in those markets.
Great. Well, one thing that I love about Hyperlocal in general as a marketer is that location tells you a tremendous amount about an individual. It can often be a great proxy for wealth or income, potentially other demographic or psychographic data, and so that's really powerful. But then when I'm thinking about personalizing or deploying localized offers into communities as a retailer, sort of how local is too local? Sort of, I would imagine response rates, vary by concentric rings around a potential retailer, or and you have situations where that would be different based on whether you've got a city footprint with heavy public transportation versus one where everyone walks or bicycles, right? So how would deployment vary based on those kinds of differences in geography when deploying, this technology?
Well, look, I'm with you, Kevin, right? And that's why we've got the name Zone as our ticker symbol. I believe that everything is hyper local and hyper personal. And the way the market is going is that I only want to know about something that's relevant to me now and that is accessible to me within 5 or 10 minutes. I don't want to know about something that I have to go to. I can get that through traditional media, broadcast media, and others, and through posters and things like that. I can get that kind of broader things, but things that are on my mobile phone is about now and about right now, right near me, and that's of interest to me. If it's not of interest to me, it's going to be an irritant, and if it is not local to me, it's going to be an irritant. So those are the two things that I think marketeers need to think about more carefully. Of course, slightly self-serving, because Rezolve is exactly that. It's exactly that's exactly what we're all about. But many of our triggers, as I mentioned before, are designed specifically for at the moment in a personalized way. For example, one of our triggers is beacons or Bluetooth beacons. They have had a checkered past in terms of how they've been introduced and utilized. But with Rezolve, I'll give you a couple of examples. One would be that as I walk up to digital signage, a beacon in the digital signage, which would be installed there, recognizes my app on my phone, and as a result of that, presents an ad to me that is relevant and pertinent to me. Kind of Minority Report, if you remember that movie, kind of scenario, but very relevant and very pertinent to me. And then as I walk past, the ad will change to the next person who has a Rezolve enabled app on their phone. Now that's useful, right? It's not interesting to me to walk past a poster that is selling, baby powder, because I'm not going to use it, for myself. Well, I don't know, who knows, right? Maybe that wasn't the best example, but you know what I mean. If it's something that is, not designed for me and not appropriate, I'm ignoring it. It's not in my radar. But it's something that's relevant to me. That's useful. I mean, advertising has a really important place in behavioral engagement and commercial activity, if it meets, this has been going on for decades. When television started, it was always about who is going to watch that program and who should be the advertisers for it. That was a very broad brush. We're now at the point now that you can be so much more hyper personalized, and that's one example of how that can work in an efficient way. Another way, which is simply convenient, is driving into a car park and the gate will open automatically because it knows I've got a Rezolve enabled app on my phone and the gate has a beacon in it. And as I leave, the gate opens again and takes the money from my app. And while that journey is taking place, aside from the fact that I don't have to go and get a ticket and waste a lot of time finding the coins and all that sort of stuff, pay for it, because it's just convenience, is that things can be presented to me at those times as I'm leaving the gate. Thank you, Dan. Did you know there's an offer on tickets for the next Rolling Stones concert that's happening here at this auditorium in 2 weeks' time? Okay, well, that's interesting because I'm obviously in the area. I'm just parked up there and I can buy that with a tap. This kind of hyper-local, hyper-personalization engagement is the future. And I think that it's, the sooner marketeers latch onto it, I know they already are, but the sooner they latch onto it for their clients, those clients are going to benefit the most.
So one thing that's a bit controversial at the moment is there's an ad, I think it came out earlier this month, that Apple has released for the iPhone that has really sort of, I think, pushed the pendulums so far into the privacy realm that it's a little bit silly, because it doesn't take into account the fact that in order to properly serve the consumer, sometimes the app vendor or retailer must know their identity. And so, there's almost an educational element to any of these app deployments with regards to having the consumer understand, in order to provide you the value that you really want and need, I need to know who you are. And we've seen some app developers muck things up, right, and take things without fully disclosing, take data that they didn't fully disclose, et cetera. But the reality is the apps that people love most know their identity. Uber has to know your identity to charge the ride to you, right? And Amazon's app needs to know your identity if you want to reorder that case of popcorn. So it seems like there's almost these two camps of future apps. There's the ones where it's very clear to the consumer, in order to serve you, I need your identity. And then there's the others who are potentially on the wrong side of the privacy fence.
Yes. Look, I mean, it's a hot potato. That the reality is that you can always find out your customers' details when a customer engages with you. Okay. And until that point, protection of my interest, potential interest based around my behavior with other parties may not be your right to know. Okay. So, and of course in Europe, where you may sense I'm from, given my accent originally, is that we have this very intense infrastructure of GDPR that provides a wrapper around how customers' data is able to be utilized. Now, I think that there is some value in protecting users' rights over the way in which they're engaging with other parties. But I think the fundamental thing is that each merchant needs to know who their customers are. And that's perfectly okay, because customers don't have a problem. I mean, I go into a store today and I buy something. I don't have a problem with them knowing who I am. And if they had the systems to recognize that my card is addressed to this name and is billed to this address, which they could ask that, but they don't, because you tap it or whatever, and that data isn't transferred to the merchant at the moment. They don't know, unless I'm paying with an app, who their customers are with the existing payment systems. They don't paying with cash and so on. But the consumer doesn't mind. They're buying something from the merchant. I mean, they might want a warranty. They might want, might come back with a return. And there's all sorts of there's no issue with that. The issue is, and quite rightly, I think, is protecting consumers around engagement with other parties that then result in a completely unknown party approaching me for my business because of my activity elsewhere. Now, some people might say, I'm happy with that. I don't mind being offered things by others who might be of interest to me. But a lot of other consumers will say, no, I don't want that. I want my privacy retained with the people I choose to engage with. And I think that's perfectly fine. And I think that really doesn't relate to Rezolve so much. What we do is we provide the infrastructure to do both of those things, to provide people who are interested in engaging with people that they don't know in the right way, with things that are relevant and pertinent and actionable, if I want to, and for me to engage with the people I do engage with in a more efficient way, because I don't want, Albertsons, Safeway pushing Pampers nappies to me, right? Diapers. I don't need those, so don't push them to me, right? And I'm not saying that they do that. I'm just saying that the idea that they might, because they don't understand exactly who I am, is just an irritant. We get a lot of those already. We're already inundated with irritating communications from some merchants that we engage with, just because they don't really understand who they're talking to. They're just doing blanket kind of mailings.
Yeah, I mean, well, I when I wear my media buying hat, obviously, I look at the efficiency of any channel to communicate with the consumer, and the relevance is a huge factor, right? So we've all seen diaper/nappy ads when we were not in market for those, or denture creams when we're not in market for those. Thank goodness I'm not in market for that yet either, right? But yet the companies have spent a lot of money to make me aware of their products when it's not relevant. So I think what's exciting and hopefully doesn't disappear as a result of this having the proper relationship right between the app and the consumer is the ability for the consumer to receive much more targeted, relevant offers, because at that point it doesn't feel like advertising to them. The closer it gets to relevance, the less it feels like advertising and marketing, and the more it feels like the retailer has my best interests at heart.
Let me give you an example, a good example. Okay, let's say I'm a sports franchise like I don't know, the New York Giants, okay? And it's game night, and it's 6 p.m., and there's a game at 7 p.m., and I've got 3,000 empty seats. Today, I'm not selling any of those seats. It's almost impossible for me to shift any of those seats in a 1 hour period before the game. But if I knew who was in the local area, who was a fan, the New York Giants, who was probably going to be watching it on TV or going to the local bar, and I was able to communicate to just them and say, hey, we know you're only a mile away, and we've got tickets for today's game, and you can buy them now at a discount. Just tap it, bring the kids, bring the family. They'd sell those tickets, or they sell a lot of them. And the same is, and Rezolve provides that. You drop a geozone, a geofence around the stadium, and you can communicate to the fans who have the New York Giants app on their phone, who have expressed interest for tickets at the last minute, whatever it happens to be, and they can talk to those people. And they're not talking to people who are a Giants fan who is based in Miami or in Los Angeles or in, France, right? Because that would just be irritating. They'd be going, well, why am I getting this? I'm not nowhere near the stadium. I'm never going to be able to make that game in 10 minutes, right? Or half an hour. But if I'm in a mile or a 2 mile radius of the stadium, I can do that. I can walk there. So that's that kind of proximity-based marketing obviously applies to, hot restaurants and Broadway shows and, all sorts of, festivals, all sorts of things that are, difficult to market at the right moment, right at the moment at which it's available for somebody who is nearby. But if I was sitting in a bar with you, Kevin, and we were friends and we were having a drink after work in the Broadway area, and it's 6:30 p.m. and either you or I get a notification that there's tickets for the Hamilton show starting in an hour, and it's 2 blocks away, and we can buy 2 tickets. And I go, you know what? We were going to go for it. What do you think? Why don't we go see the Broadway show? I wanted to go see that. Tap, I bought tickets. We're going at a discount. That's extremely compelling for me as a consumer, and extremely compelling for Hamilton, who, may have some remnant tickets to the matinee or the evening performance. So, it's just an efficient way to do it, but you can't do it if you don't know who the customer is, because you end up irritating them. Because I don't want to go and see Hamilton if I'm not interested in the musicals,
So final question, a lot of the scenarios that you provided work really well once critical mass is reached. And if critical mass hasn't been reached yet, then many marketers and retailers may say, well, it hasn't reached critical mass. I'm not sure I want to add this to my to-do list yet. So what are the plans to reach critical mass, particularly in metro areas, so that the marketers, that want to reach those people can sort of feel confident that, okay, well, there's a critical mass of my customers here?
So the answer obviously varies from who we're talking about, right? If it's McDonald's, they already have their customers with their apps. They can already engage with those customers with our technology in a way that they can't today. And the same is true for the New York Giants, right? Because in the scenario, if I'm a fan of the New York Giants, I've got their app on my phone, right? If I'm a fan, so they can do the scenarios I just gave you. If it's a hot table or a Broadway show, then maybe it's open table that I've got the app on my phone, and it would go into there, and suddenly the restaurant has this distribution method to sell a remnant table in a hot restaurant that I would go to, but you might not, Kevin, because you don't like that kind of restaurant, that kind of food. That's there today. And then, the scenario that you were saying for is really appropriate for SMBs who don't have an app. Now, in that situation, of course, we need what we call a distributor partner. And that could be PayPal or Klarna or AT&T or, Citi or Pinterest or TikTok, right? We haven't got that yet in the United States. So, at the moment, our market applicability is more focused on the larger retailers who have their own app and or the larger brands. But we are in negotiations with a number of distributor partners who may well deploy our technology, and suddenly that will open up the entire market. In other markets outside of the United States, we do have that ecosystem in place. We do in China with WeChat and UnionPay. We have hundreds of thousands of merchants onboarded to our platform. In India, we have a similar situation, and we focused on China really because it's the most advanced mobile market for payments and engagement. And so we felt that if we could be successful there, we can bring our technology to other markets, having tested it in the most grueling, intense mobile market in the world, right? So now we're starting to move into and we do have some announcements coming soon that will give you comfort that we're opening up the US market too.
Great.
But I'm saying the short answer really is that we're applicable to those who have an app and are communicating with their customers today and can be deployed in a matter of days. And we will be applicable to everybody when we secure a consumer partner.
Great. Well, the evolution of the mobile marketing ecosystem is super exciting. It sounds like you're really at the forefront once again. So I appreciate you jumping on the podcast with me, and I look forward to watching your continued deployment into the States.
That's very kind of you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure being on this podcast. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm always welcome to join you again in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.